What's up guys, welcome back to Build Fix. This is episode number 21, my monthly series where I help people choose the parts to build a new computer with. And I feel like I should start off with an apology today because PC building has gotten more difficult this month rather than less difficult. Rather than looking at Black Friday sales and prices going down, we have seen a dramatic increase, especially with RAM prices. SSD prices have been going up as well. That is supposedly due to a global shortage caused by AI. I've been trying to give some warnings about this, specifically with last month's Build Fix, but if you happen to have built a month or two ago, congratulations, you chose the right time to build. But if you're still looking to build a PC right now, you can still do it. We're gonna do a bit of A/B comparison to look at what prices were for typical builds a month or 2 or 3 months ago versus now. And I also need to say a big thank you to PCPartPicker for sponsoring Build Fix.
Excellent!
Today's video is brought to you by the Paul's Hardware store on paulshardware.net, the only official source for Paul's Hardware merchandise, tantalizing t-shirts, brilliant beer sets, high-quality hoodies, and more, all featuring the classic thumbscrew for tasteful and refined viewers, or the 8-bit thumbscrew for tasteful and refined viewers who hate curves. New designs are added sporadically and at random, so head over to paulshardware.net and get some of that sweet, sweet merch right now. Or not right now, after you watch the video. Either way. So about a month ago, I told you guys to build now, not later, with the October episode of Build Fix. And while that advice still stands, prices still seem to be going up rather than down. So if you are in need of a new PC, I would still recommend buying now rather than waiting for the next month or 2 or 3 to go by. Prices still seem to be ticking upwards rather than downwards. And we're looking at about $100 plus for a RAM kit that was about $100 cheaper a month or a month and a half ago. So I'm gonna look at how that's affected your typical entry-level AM5 build, more mid to upper range AM5 build with a 9800X3D, or something that's going pretty high end with a 9950X3D and something like an RTX 5080 or 5090. But if you're not familiar with the series and you'd like me to go over your build possibly in the future, then make sure to subscribe to my channel because you might see a community post go up like this. They're under the post tabs on my YouTube channel, by the way. And I usually make this post a day or two before I shoot the video, and there's also a poll included. This is actually a rematch pie poll from the poll I did last November, where I included cherry pie, which a lot of people were like, you know, you need pecan pie in there if you're really making this a legitimate poll. On the mobile site, you can see this is a Peapod and a can, which is pecan pie, which was also in the comments section last year, so I included it this time. Although it doesn't quite render properly on the desktop, I'm voting for Apple because I'm sorry, I make apple pie from scratch. You guys might have seen my videos on that. And justifiably, Apple has won with 30% of the vote. Pumpkin pie coming in at 28%. Pecan pie did edge out chocolate pie, so we do have some justice for pecan pie lovers out there. And I gotta say, we might have to do this poll over again at some point because it's possible that the false rendering of the Peapod did impact the voting to some degree. But anyway, the builds I'm gonna go over for this month were taken from the comments section down here. And one other thing that happened a few times this month was people shared PCPartPicker lists that were set to private. I can't look at private lists. So if you have a parts list going and you're choosing Save As to make a saved parts list to share with me, make sure you uncheck private there so I can actually look at them, just FYI. See, like that. Otherwise it says that. But let's dig into our first build. This one's sent over by StephenColtharp. This is entry level, perhaps higher tier entry level AM5 build, a budget of around $1,000. And for that, you're probably gonna go with one of AMD's 6-core CPU options, the 9600 or 9600X for the current generation. You might also find a good deal on a 7600 or 7600X. The remainder of the components here, which as Jeff.78 noted, are solid choices. This is a pretty solid build all around. But if you're comparing to previous months, you might note that the memory kits, and do note that this is 2 16 gig memory kits because that's what Steven said they have. But that's close to $200 of the price. So the second most expensive component in this build behind the video card is memory, followed then by your CPU and motherboard. And the overall price for this build is closer to $1,200 than to $1,000. So let's compare this to the build from last month that was more entry level, but also used the 9600X. That one came in at $922, but do note that we were using a graphics card that's about $100 cheaper. The B580 is $250, should be about $250 still. However, we can see the memory kit, a Patriot Viper Venom 32 gig kit. It's DDR5 6400 CL32, was $103 only about a month ago. So that, along with the SSD, and while there was a 1 terabyte SSD that was zeroed out, there was a 2 terabyte drive added in as well, so that was $100. And it is also a bit harder to find a 2 terabyte NVMe SSD that's reasonable quality for for that much as well. Most of those have gone up by $20, $30, sometimes $40, but even our case and our power supply were comparable, coming in at about $82 to $57. Again, for that nice sub $1,000 total at $922. Here is that same build, just loaded up now with updated PCPartPicker prices, and the price has gone up by pretty much $100, and that can pretty much almost entirely be accounted to that Patriot Viper Venom kit that's jumped by about 90 or so, maybe a few dollars less than that, and likewise our 2TB NVMe SSD has also jumped from about $100 to $130. It is contrasted a little bit by the fact that we now have like a B580 available for $235, so there's a little bit of savings there. Even our 9600X is on sale a little bit over at Amazon. That's down by $7 or $8, which isn't awesome, but hey, if we're trying to save money, $7 or $8 is $7 or $8. Switching into build fix mode for this build though, I will say again, it's a pretty solid build overall. There isn't too much I would change. Part of the reason we went with two 16 gig memory kits is because that's what was listed here. And apparently one of those kits came free with the motherboard. Maybe that was a Micro Center purchase. That's a pretty common thing over there. Also noteworthy, PSU motherboard, RAM, and SSD have already been purchased for this build. Good going there. If you pre-purchased anything at this point, pre-buying the RAM has probably saved you at least a few dollars already. So for the sake of brevity and practicality, for anyone who's looking to build a system along these lines, I'm going to show you what I would swap out here. The cooler is not necessarily a bad cooler at all, it's just low profile, and the case does not necessarily need a low profile cooler. So I would opt for using something that takes up a little bit more space to improve its thermal efficiency, and I think that's worth spending a few extra dollars on. Likewise, anyone who's buying new memory right now who didn't get a free kit that they're trying to pair up or something like that, you'll find on AM5 especially, it's more difficult to get 4 sticks running all together. Also, if you're plugging in something like XMP values for a memory kit, those are going to be settings for the specific kit that's installed. So 2-stick kit has expo settings for a 2-stick configuration. If you try to enable that with 4 sticks, it might work, but there's also a decent chance that it won't work and you'll encounter instability. Then you'll need to go in and manually tweak or tune those memory settings, which not everyone is comfortable doing. So for that reason, if you're buying new, I would say get a 2-stick configuration, and the go-to right now is 2 16 gig sticks, DDR5 6000, 6200 or 6400 is also okay. And then keep the CAS latency down and cross your fingers that you can find a kit that's not grossly overpriced. So just using the PCPartPicker filters, I have the speed set to between 6000 and 6600, 2x16 gig kit, and CAS latency 34 max. Drum roll, the cheapest kit that meets those specs, hey, is that same Patriot Viper Venom kit. That's part of the reason we got it. It was a good deal at around $100 or less. Now it's not a good deal, but it is the best deal available that meets these specifications. There's also a G.Skill Ripjaws S5 kit down here that would work. Both of those are about $190. I'm gonna go with the G.Skill kit just because aesthetically speaking, it's gonna match a little bit better. Actually, hold that thought for 1 second. Between these two kits, if you're building on AM5, I would actually opt for the Patriot Viper Venom. That is because the G.Skill S5 series is more tailored toward Intel builds. It has XMP 3.0, but it does not have Expo. The AM5 platform can read and set up XMP settings. It's just Expo settings go a little bit deeper than the XMP settings from Intel. So again, for a first-time builder, I would opt for something that is Expo ready as well and has a profile for that. In particular, if they're going for the same price. Now for the rest of the parts we have, I would only really be looking to see if we can save any significant amount of money. An RX 9060 XT 16 gig is a really good choice for this caliber of build, and I don't think there's any selling for less than $350. Gotta make sure we don't pull up any of the 8 gig models, of course. All right, that's the cheapest 9060 available, so nowhere to go there. Now, $150 for a 2TB NVMe SSD is a little bit on the high side. It's higher than it used to be, but there are still options where you can save maybe $20 or $30 if you're willing to dip down a little bit. And do note that for gaming, there's not really a huge impact to gaming performance by going with like a Gen 3 SSD, or even possibly a slower Gen 4 option could be something to consider as well. So just going for a drive that will save the most amount of money while still giving you that 2TB capacity. The Patriot P400 Lite is a good choice there. And look, now we have Patriot memory and SSD. Gets ourselves a little bit of a set bonus. I'm gonna drop in a different CPU cooler for you here. Aha, and here's a good reason why I should have double checked the case a little bit more. This is a Johnsbow C6 case, which is a very small case, although it still fits a micro ATX motherboard, but it does that by putting the power supply right there, which definitely impacts the type of CPU cooler that you have installed. So for anyone who was hearing me talk a few minutes ago about, hey, you could put a larger CPU cooler in there, but who's familiar with this case, I correct myself now, so I'm sorry about that. PCPartPicker knew, of course, if we include the compatibility filter for this build, and we're just looking at thermal-right coolers right now, it limits us to the low profile options. That's because they include the case specifications for cooler height, and then they cross-compare that to the coolers that it's recommending, and it only recommends you coolers that are below a certain height, which means you totally had the right choice already with the AXP90-X47. We will add that back in, and we will find that I impacted the price only very slightly. But for the purposes of comparison, looking at only about a month or so ago to now, we are looking at about $100, maybe a little bit over $100 in increased price for this kind of build. But this is the fixed build that I would recommend to anyone who is looking to build a system along these lines, especially if you're trying to keep the footprint down with something like the Johnsbow C6. I just wish the CPU cooler had like a TDP rating in the specs. I couldn't seem to find that anywhere in terms of the wattage that it's rated for in terms of heat dissipation. Moving on to our next build though, sent by Midnight Premier with the 9800X3D. So this one's representative kind of the most recommended solid mid to high end gaming PC build with the best CPU for gaming, which is the 9800X3D right now, and a graphics card that pairs up well with that, which on the AMD side I would say would be a 9070 or 9070 XT, and on the NVIDIA side would be a 5070 Ti, 5080, or 5090, and those will greatly impact the price. But in the case of Midnight Premier, we're going with a 9070 XT Sapphire Pulse. We also have an air cooler, 1000 watt power supply, a 32 gig memory kit, a B850 motherboard by the Asus ROG Strix, and it looks like some or all these parts maybe have already been purchased for a price of about $2,025. Have those prices gone up? Well, at first glance, yes, they have, or at least on PCPartPicker, as I added, I think pretty much all the same components that were listed. We're at $2,235 right now, and a fair amount of that price looks like it comes from the memory, which is now up to $300, making it the third most expensive component in this build behind the graphics card and the CPU. Jumping back to the June build fix, episode number 16, I have a similar build to this with the 9800X3D. This one was slightly different because it uses an RTX 5070 Ti for the graphics card. The memory kit, which is comparable, was only $90 at the time. Look at the memory kit. It was only $90. Oh my gosh, remember that when memory was only like less than $100. My adjustments to this build got it down under $3,000, but do note that that also includes a $730-ish monitor. Once again, taking that same build and looking at it now, we're at still under $3,000, but the memory kit I chose is now $240 instead of, $90 or so. Also of note is that GPU prices were still a little bit on the higher side back in June, so our least expensive 5070 Ti, which was $840 at the time, is now down to its MSRP of about $750. And again, for the sake of brevity, I'm not going to make a whole lot of changes to this build in terms of fixing it. The motherboard is sometimes one where I will say, hey, maybe try to find a motherboard that's less than $200, especially for a B850 chipset. That said, this Asus ROG Strix B850-F gaming Wi-Fi does give you some added benefits in terms of aesthetics, RGB lighting if that's something that you're into. You're also going to get a little bit better connectivity in terms of the I/O, as well as some nice features that are useful to have, like Wi-Fi 7 by default. Oh, I should also note that I swapped in the NZXT H5 Flow case rather than the H510. The H510 is discontinued now, so it's harder to find. And this case has an RGB version and a non-RGB version. Non-RGB version was $95, so I went with the RGB for just $5 more. You get 3 more fans. But all right, a quick pass for the sake of trying to save as much money as possible. And despite what I said about that motherboard, I am going to swap it out. We'll see if we can find a slightly less expensive memory kit. And the 9100 Pro is a very solid and fast NVMe SSD, but I don't see any use cases listed here that are actually going to benefit much from going with a very expensive or a much comparably more expensive Gen 5 drive. So we'll see if we can save a few bucks there as well. All right, first off, to save $100 or so on the motherboard, we have the MSI Mag B850 Tomahawk Max Wi-Fi. Solid all-around motherboard, and it's not $300. Using those same memory filters to look at less expensive DDR5 kits that are more around $200-ish. And what the heck, will preserve your RGB lighting as well. All right, so for this is about $30 to $40 over kind of that base level kit that we used for the entry level, but it gets you RGB. G.Skill is a very solid brand for memory as well. And their Z5 Neo kits do have AMD Expo. Hooray! That's about $65 or so less than that Kingston kit. And then for SSD choices, we've got 2 terabyte models down in the $120 to $130-ish range. If you can find one that has dedicated cache, that can often improve performance. So here's one that is worth spending a few extra dollars on. It's a Gen 4 drive, but it is actually hitting speeds that are towards the top end of what Gen 4 is capable of. It has a dedicated cache and it's $150, so we'll go with that one. And that brings our overall price back down to about what was paid originally, about $2,025. So that actually is absorbing a little bit of that price increase for the memory by swapping out the motherboard. I'd say the last thing you could do here to save another $30 to $40-ish would be going with a Thermalright cooler like a Peerless Assassin or a Phantom Spirit. There's some really solid choices that are more like $35 to $40 versus spending $80. That said, this is a really good cooler and it's going to be very quiet. It is a Be Quiet cooler after all. They have to make them quiet, it's in their name. But there are my updates to that, and now let's look at a high-end build with a lot that was said. So I'm not gonna be able to cover everything in this post, I do appreciate, but I'm gonna do my best. Current build is from 2016, so we're looking at a very nice upgrade going to a 9950X3D. Down here at the bottom we have a fair amount of games that are being played, as well as MATLAB, Python, numerical analysis, mathematical modeling, Unity UE5 development, other software development. So we're going to be taking advantage of the additional cores and threads in the 9950X3D. It being an X3D CPU also means it's going to be fantastic for gaming and crossover use, and we have a 128 gig memory kit, 2x64 gigs, which is $800 at Amazon. So once again, we have a build where a pretty big amount of the price is going to be coming from the memory. And here is that build with current pricing. So the 9950X3D is currently going for about $680. We have an all-in-one liquid cooler, which I don't always recommend, but if you're going for the higher core count CPUs, I would say it's definitely worth the investment. And we're not looking at a terribly expensive one here since it's closer to $100. Don't pay $150 or $200 plus for an AIO right now, because most of that cost goes towards like putting LED screens on it and stuff, which doesn't get you more performance. We have an X870E motherboard, which is also what I would pair with this CPU. X870E has a double chipset, so it gets you a lot more I/O than standard X870 or B850. As predicted, that memory kit, 128 gigs, is going for $800 right now. And it is crazy to me that with a build that includes a 5090 that's close to $3,000, as well as the best mainstream processor that AMD makes right now, as well as a solid X870E motherboard, but the number 2 price component in this build is our $800 memory kit. That said, for workstations and use cases where you're actually going to need more than 32 gigs of memory, it's a pretty vital component for the build, so I'm not going to dissuade you from that. I'm also somewhat curious about your monitor setup. We have three 2560 by 1440 144 Hz monitors. I would normally say if you're going for multi-monitors, do a gaming monitor that's going to be your main monitor that you're playing on, and then for your secondary monitor, consider something that maybe isn't super high refresh rate but has better color depth, especially if you're doing any creative work that involves creative design or video editing or anything along those lines. However, with 3 of these, it looks like maybe you're going for a wraparound gaming monitor setup, and while you do need a high-end graphics card for that, such as a 5090, this is the only case where I would say, yes, go ahead and stick with 3 gaming monitors. But for most people, if you're just going to be gaming on one main monitor, consider something different for your second monitor. Having them match is less important to me than having 2 different types of panels that might have 2 different types of experiences, especially again if you're doing creative work, which can greatly benefit from better color depth. So our total price here is just under $6,000, $5,891. And do note that a full half of that price is a $3,000 RTX 5090. My recommendation lately for 5090s is to try to hold out for a $2,000 one because the price increases from that are pretty tough to swallow. But just giving a quick comparison to 1 month ago, we had a 9950X3D build that also included an X870E motherboard, 96 gigs of memory, which was $440 at the time. That same gigabyte, 2 terabyte NVMe SSD, which has also gone up in price by about $30. But most noteworthy here is the change for the GPU. This one had a 5070 Ti 16 gig for $850 versus a $3,000 5090. So bearing in mind that this is not an apples to apples comparison, this build was $2,879 1 month ago. And if you add $2,200-ish for the price difference from the 5070 Ti to the 5090, that would bring it up to about $5,000. But let's compare that price 1 month ago, $2,879, to the exact same build right now, and it's gone up by about $200, and that is, what's that mostly? Oh, that's mostly due to that memory jumping up by $200. Can also point a little bit of blame at that NVMe SSD going up in price a little bit. But to give Manic Mathematician some feedback on the choices here, I'm going to say you've done well. you've made some good choices overall. Yes, you're looking at an expensive system, but it looks like you're going to be using it for actual work as well as gaming, and that makes it much more justifiable to spend more money. You absolutely have the processor that I would choose to go with. You've made a good choice going with the liquid CPU cooler in this situation, and you have one that's not terribly overpriced. Your motherboard choice is also solid for a good X870E motherboard. I tend to aim for about $300 to $400. This one checks all the boxes that you want for a motherboard without costing $500 plus, which I appreciate. I'm somewhat curious what the lowest price is for a 128 gig kit, such as the one that you have. But yeah, I mean, it looks like you could save $40 or so by going with a non-RGB Flare X kit that also has slightly looser timings at CL34 instead of CL32. Everything below that has pretty not great timings or much lower DDR5 based speeds, so I don't think you can go anywhere with the memory kit. This is a 4TB NVMe SSD, so $250 actually seems fairly reasonable for that. In terms of your RTX 5090, I still think $3,000 is a lot. I still think $2,000 is too much money for an RTX 5090, but if this is the card you want, you kind of have to go with what's available. And it's been a week or so since I did GPU price watch, but yeah, the $2,000 ones seem to be harder and harder to find, and sort of the lowest price for something that's readily available seems to be more around the $2,600 to $2,700 range. The one you've chosen is the MSI Supreme, which is their higher end model, so it might have a little bit better cooling than something that's a little bit more towards the quote-unquote budget side of the RTX 5090 GPUs that are available. That said, it's not going to make that much of a difference. So the Gigabyte Gaming OC right now that you can get for $2,700, is that a real seller? But that's from a marketplace seller. I wouldn't buy that from an 80% feedback marketplace seller, personally. I mean, Zotac has the AIO model for $2,800. That's just being sold directly by Newegg. So I mean, that might be something worth considering. Of course, adding another AIO to your build adds another possible potential points of failure. So that's not always something I recommend going for. So anyway, those are my thoughts, my feedback on the 5090 choice. Beyond that, you have components that all make a fair amount of sense. Yes, it is a slightly more expensive case, but the Haven HS420 I have built in, it's a great case. It's worth spending a little bit more money, especially for a build of this caliber on a nice case, especially that's gonna fit everything and have good airflow. You also have a very high-end power supply, 1300 watts, that's $360. But it is 80 plus platinum rated, and it has a native 12V 2x6 connector, so that's, I'd say the only downside for this power supply is it's from 2022, so it has a 12VH power rather than 12V 2x6, which is slightly updated. That said, it is fantastic build quality. It has an A+ rating on the PSU tier list. If you're looking at other options, you'll note that the estimated wattage for this build is 1,015 watts, and that's part of the reason why we're only looking at much higher end power supplies. I would not go with something like a 1050 watt PSU. But here's what I would do to look at other potential power supplies. We're filtering for 80 plus titanium and platinum rated power supplies, looking at wattages of 1200 watts or above, and making sure that we have at least one 12VH power or 12V 2x6 power connector for your RTX 5090. So like right here, this Superflower notably is a power supply OEM. They actually manufacture power supplies, and they actually OEM for a lot of other PSU sellers. But the Platinum Pro down here up to 1200 watts is A+ rated. It's from 2023. Of course, I have not solved the problem of getting the slightly newer connector with 12V 2x6. This one still has 12VH power, but it is at least $160+ cheaper, although you do drop to 1200 watts from 1300 watts. But all right, I am totally running out of time, so my follow-up advice would be to continue to go down this list to try to find a 12V 2x6 native power connector option. But honestly, your choices are pretty solid across the board, and that's what I wanted to really reiterate to you, is you seem to be looking for some backup to your choices, and I will say yes, you get that from me. You've made some good choices. But that is gonna wrap it up for Build Fix episode number 21 for November of 2025. I've got some more deals videos coming out for you guys later this month, so stay tuned for those. Hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you'd like to be notified when I do the next build fixes. I'll post links to the builds I went over, as well as PC Part Picker, down in the video's description. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you all in the next one.